Before the human hand existed, the earth had already endured the long, slow breaths of stone and dust. Ancient rivers, now only dry traces on geological maps, once rushed through valleys filled with volcanic ash. Winds carried red dust, drifting from the highlands to the lowlands, leaving upon the ground a fine sediment, thin as a veil of time draped over worlds that had been lost. Volcanoes erupted, forming basaltic plateaus. The cooled rock cracked into fragments, each fragment a small page in the planet's memory. Then the rains came, season after season, epoch after epoch, washing away the ash and carving the first streams into the earth. Soil rose and eroded. Forests grew and faded. Young grasslands spread across former inland seas. The creatures of the humid forests retreated, yielding to grazers of the plains, and following them came predators. Beings learning to see farther, stand taller, and perceive the shifts in the wind. Amid these landscapes, bipedal creatures began to stand upright. They had no fangs, no claws, no wings, and no speed. Their bodies were fragile under the scorching sun and in the presence of predators. As climates changed, forests receded, leaving only grasslands stretching to the horizon. Survival demanded adaptation. Every step on the parched earth became an experiment between body and environment, between biological limits and the imperative to live. The ground, layered with fragmented rock and red dust, became a stage for exploratory movement, for the first interactions between organism and matter, where a stone fragment, a broken branch, or a slick patch could determine life or death. The earth, in the silence of stone, continued to record everything. Sedimentary layers thickened, preserving footprints, shattered bones, and sometimes a stone marked by a first strike. These silent witnesses do not speak, but tell their stories in other ways, through seemingly random yet patterned arrangements, through the wear of quartz, through cracks in stone that no modern hand could imitate. All of this is the manuscript of time, engraving the rhythm of survival into every grain of soil, every pebble, every blade of grass. From these fragments, a story emerges. No invention is accidental. Tools, throughout the long history of life, were not born of curiosity, but of the pressures of survival. Every idea, every stone lifted, originates in hunger, in cold, in approaching darkness. And from random impacts, from clumsy initial grasps, the hand gradually learned to perceive shape, force, and the consequences of each action, to understand why the hand learned to grasp, why the brain learned to envision the shape of stone before shaping it. One must return to the moment when need met opportunity, when instinct met matter, and reflex transformed into creation. At that moment, a stone was no longer merely stone. It became a natural response of life against death. A strike upon a stone did not merely create a sharp edge. It was the first imprint of primitive intellect, the beginning of technical thought. And that story began in the dust of ancient Africa, where the pale blue sky stretched over golden grey plains, where every passing wind carried a pulse of history. There earth and stone still remembered the first time a human hand touched the world. This is where Origins, the human saga, begins to listen, to perceive, to recount the whispers of the planet and of the first creatures that transformed stone into intellect. The earth then was a world of profound transformation. From the late Miocene to the early Pliocene, continental plates slid slowly beneath the oceans, raising mountain ranges and altering the flow of wind and rain. In Africa, Where humid forests once extended to the horizon, the climate began to dry. Forests thinned, seas receded. Large gaps appeared between forest patches, a kind of ecological fracture, where many species were forced to choose, adapt, migrate, or disappear. In these open spaces, light filtered through sparse tree canopies, revealing rugged ground, broken branches, shallow pools. Every movement was exposed. Every action was a test of survival. Bipedal creatures had to learn to read the signs of wind, darkness, scent, and sound, gradually developing observational skills that dense forests had never required. In this expanded tableau, every mound of earth, every stone, every blade of grass became part of a delicate survival network. From this network, the first foundations of tools, intellect, and human consciousness began to take shape, merging with the long breath of the earth, like a geological symphony written in dust, stone, and time. Average temperatures gradually dropped. Seasons became more distinct. The rainy season shortened, the dry season lengthened. Under the harsh white sun, the ground cracked. Winds carried dust from deserts deep into the interior. Many large apes, accustomed to dense canopies, began to lose shelter. Some primate lineages were forced to descend to the ground, living in open spaces full of risk but also opportunity. With no thick canopy to hide beneath, every action was exposed. Threats from predators became clear, and every gust of wind, every movement in the grass, became a signal for survival. In the East African valleys, modern Kenya, Ethiopia, Tanzania, the first Australopithecus fossils appear. Neither human nor ape, their gait partially upright, their hands more dexterous, yet their brains still small. Fossil evidence shows they lived in mosaic landscapes of grasslands and sparse forests, with rivers, lakes, and seasonally flooded areas. The expanse of their environment reached the horizon, yet danger was fully present. Vast space increased both risk and opportunity. Survival pressures came from all directions. Predators lurked in tall grass. Food availability shifted with seasons. Fruit vanished quickly during drought. In these conditions, memory, mobility, and environmental exploitation became keys to survival. Cold, hunger, and scarcity forced these creatures to adapt to uncertainty, gradually developing refined reflexes, tracking footprints of animals, the sound of leaves stirring, scents signaling water or food. During prolonged droughts, herds moved. Following them were groups of but movement was not enough. They began to observe. A dry branch could crack a hard fruit. A stone could cut flesh. In a world where every mistake could mean death, attention became an evolutionary instinct. Observation was not temporary cognition. It became an instinct engraved over time, where eyes, hands, and brain coordinated to seize every survival opportunity. Every discovery, no matter how small, was a response to the environment. No experiment was planned, yet every action was filtered through survival. From this unconscious chain of trials, the first premises of tools gradually emerged. Even before the hands of Homo habilis, the earth had begun experimenting with intellect, forcing the body and cognition of organisms to change. Australopithecus stands as witness to that era. A species pushed to the boundary between forest and plain, between instinct and conception. Living in an open world, no longer sheltered by trees, they learned to confront wind, sun, and long sight. From that harsh light, early awareness of space, time, and cause and effect began to form. As each step, each strike upon a stone or branch, became living data, accumulated in memory in preparation for the next action. When the earth changed, life responded. And from these small responses, the foundations of human intelligence were laid. Every grain of dust, every footprint, every stone fractured by hands unaware of the magnitude of their actions. East Africa, around 4 million years ago, was a stretch of land opening under the tension of the Earth's crust. From Ethiopia down to Mozambique, massive faults cut deep into the ancient bedrock. The continent split slowly, a few millimeters per year, yet enough to create a geological wound over 3,000 kilometers long. What humans today call the Great Rift Valley. This rifting did not merely crack the ground, it reshaped the climate and ecology of the region. As land sank, lava flowed, and large lakes formed. New mountain ranges rose, blocking moist winds from the oceans, so rainfall could no longer reach beyond. To the west, forests remained dense, but to the east, where the valleys opened, forests receded, giving way to grasslands, thorn scrub, and bare soil. Vast savannas created a challenging environment, where long-range vision became a weapon for survival, and every action reflected the rhythm of existence. In this open space, every footprint, leap, or the picking up of a stone or broken branch became a lesson. Step by step, forming awareness of tools and survival strategies, the foundations of later human thought and intelligence. Average temperatures gradually decreased. Seasons became more distinct. Rainy seasons shortened, dry seasons lengthened. Under the harsh white sun, the ground cracked. Winds carried dust from deserts deep into the interior. Many large apes, accustomed to dense canopies, began losing shelter. Some primate lineages were forced to descend to the ground, living in open spaces full of risk but also opportunity. With no dense canopy to hide beneath, every action was exposed. Predator threats became visible, and every gust of wind, every movement of the grass became a signal of survival. The openness forced light onto every detail, demanding sharp eyes and coordinated senses to detect danger from afar. Scorching sun, dust rising from parched earth, and the whispering sound of grass swaying in the wind became living data each creature had to decode to survive. In the East African valleys, modern Kenya, Ethiopia, and Tanzania, the first Australopithecus fossils appear. Neither human nor ape, their gait partially upright, hands more dexterous, yet the brain still small. Fossil evidence shows their surroundings were mosaics of grassland and sparse forest, with rivers, lakes, and seasonally flooded areas. The landscape stretched to the horizon, yet dangers were fully visible, and the vast space increased both risk and opportunity. Every step, each footprint pressed into soft soil or sand, recorded existence, becoming a witness to the tense rhythm of the savannah and the boundary between life and death. Survival pressures came from all directions. Predators lurked in tall grass. Food sources changed with the seasons. Fruit vanished quickly during droughts. Under these conditions, the ability to remember, move, and exploit the environment became the key to survival. Cold, hunger, and scarcity forced these creatures to adapt to uncertainty while gradually developing refined reflexes, recognizing animal tracks, the sound of leaves rustling, or scents signaling water or food. Every observation, every movement of the body became part of a survival map, stored in memory and expressed through action, an invisible symphony between senses. body and environment. During prolonged droughts, herds of animals moved. Following them were groups of but movement was not enough. They began to observe. A dry branch could crack a hard fruit. A stone could cut flesh. In a world where a single mistake could mean death, attention became an evolutionary instinct. Observation was not temporary awareness, but an instinct engraved over time, where eyes, hands, and brain coordinated to exploit every survival opportunity. Every touch, every exploratory gesture became living data, accumulated in memory and preparing for future reactions. Every discovery, no matter how small, was a response to the environment. No experiment was planned, yet every action was filtered through survival. From this unconscious chain of trials, the first premises of tools gradually emerged, even before the hands of Homo habilis. The Earth had begun experimenting with intelligence, forcing the body and cognition of organisms to change, creating a feedback loop where environment shaped behavior, and behavior shaped early intellect. Australopithecus stands as witness to this era. A species pressed to the boundary between forest and plain, between instinct and conception, living in an open world, no longer sheltered by trees. They learned to confront wind, sun, and distant sight. From that harsh light, early awareness of space, time, and cause and effect began to form. As each step, each strike upon a stone or branch became living data, accumulated in memory to prepare for the next action. The open landscape demanded precision in every movement, and each lesson from failure or success helped forge early intelligence, forming reflexes that combined body and cognition. When the Earth changed, life responded. And from these small responses, the foundations of human intelligence were laid. Every grain of dust, every footprint, every stone fractured by hands unaware of the greatness of their deeds, yet marking the first steps of intellect within the natural world. East Africa, around 4 million years ago, was a land stretching open under the tension of the Earth's crust. From Ethiopia down to Mozambique, massive faults cut deep into ancient rock. The continent split slowly, a few millimeters per year, enough to create a geological wound more than 3,000 kilometers long. The Great Rift Valley of today. This rifting did not merely crack the ground, it reshaped both climate and ecology. As land sank, lava flowed, and large lakes formed. New mountain ranges rose, blocking moist winds from the oceans, leaving rainfall insufficient. To the west, forests remained dense. To the east, valleys opened, forests receded, giving way to grasslands, thorn scrub, and bare soil. Vast savannas created a challenging environment, where long-range vision became a survival tool, and every action reflected the rhythm of life. In this open space, every footprint, every leap, every act of picking up a stone or broken branch became a lesson, gradually forming awareness of tools and survival strategies, the foundation of human thought and intelligence, where life learned to transform a harsh landscape into a space of memory, creativity, and strategic survival. Living between two worlds, forest and grassland, was the product of this intersection. Their bodies, adapted to climbing, gradually adjusted to walking upright. Their hands freed to carry food or manipulate objects. Every step on the ground was an experiment, and each failed trial was buried in the dry soil, leaving silent traces of evolution. From forest to savannah, dryness did not merely remove shade. It opened the path for evolution. The harshness of the environment filtered those who could observe, experiment, and adapt. It was a period when nature, through soil, climate, and time, began writing the first manuscripts of human intelligence, recorded not in words, but in footprints, bite marks, and broken stones. As the forest shadows receded, the open grasslands laid everything bare. No large trunks remained to climb at the sound of a roar, no dense canopy to conceal the scent of the body. In the wide savannah, these bipedal creatures appeared fully within the sight of enormous predators: saber-toothed cats with fangs as long as blades, giant hyenas with jaws capable of crushing bone, cheetahs, wild dogs, and circling vultures in the sky, waiting. Every dawn on the grassland was a gamble for survival, where light revealed every detail yet exposed the fragile bodies of those seeking to endure. The wind stirring the grass could signal a breeze or the approach of claws. Every distant roar was a reminder that weakness would not be spared. On that land, intelligence began to replace strength. When the body could not run fast enough, and the hands were too weak to fight, only observation, memory, and the ability to anticipate danger remained. Each group of Australopithecus learned to listen for distant sounds, read the wind to detect predator scent, and select elevated resting spots with broader views. The ever-present threat of death created not just fear, but awareness of safe distances, shelters, and defensive tools. A stone grasped was not merely to throw, but to maintain a margin between life and death. Every hand movement, every pickup of a stone or dry branch, every attempt to throw or jab became living data, accumulated to form strategic memory, laying the foundation for organized thought and judgmental reflexes later on. Those unable to adapt were eliminated. Groups that observed, learned from mistakes, survived and passed on their experiences through behavior, forming a continuous evolutionary cycle, where survival information was stored not only in genes, but also in actions. The pressure from predators sowed the first seeds of strategic thinking, paving the way for later intelligence when humans were no longer mere prey, but beings capable of calculating their own survival as dense forests shrank. Familiar plant foods also gradually disappeared. Fruit, young leaves, and insects on tree trunks once. The bulk of primate diets became scarce. Grasslands opened, but the grass was unsuitable for these bipeds. Their teeth and stomachs could not digest coarse cellulose. Amid scarcity, every opportunity to find energy became precious. Australopithecus and its descendants had to expand their dietary boundaries, exploring new lands for items previously considered inedible, from roots and stunted tubers to insects and hard, dry fruits, gradually learning to recognize nutritional value, distinguishing safe from dangerous, constructing a food map in the memory of each individual and group, building sustainable survival skills in the harsh savannah environment, roots underground, dry seeds, carcasses left behind by saber-toothed cats all became temporary sustenance. Yet approaching a decaying carcass meant entering the territory of stronger creatures. On the grasslands, around the enormous bodies of antelopes or ancient elephants, a violent ecosystem operated. First the predators, then vultures, then hyenas, and finally the weaker scavengers, picking up what remained. Within this chain, human ancestors were allowed only the final access when the bones were nearly bare and the stench of decay discouraged any larger creature from approaching. But it was within this crowded struggle the stones were grasped. Not to kill, but to break bones, extract marrow, a dense, fatty energy source fueling the growing brain. From that moment, an invisible change began. The hand learned to use objects to achieve what teeth and claws could not. Scarce food did not merely alter diet. It shaped behavioral structure, forcing patience, observation, and calculation to become survival skills. Those who waited, watched, and exploited carcasses rather than risking direct hunting survived. Across generations, individuals who learned to use simple tools to break bones, crack seeds, dig tubers, and exploit even the smallest sources of energy became the seeds of intelligence. On the African grasslands, hunger was the first teacher of humankind. From hunger, the hand learned to act. From scarcity, the mind learned to think. And from decaying carcasses left behind, humanity began to step out of the food chain through its own tools. Vision became the boundary between life and death. These two-legged creatures quickly realized that those who stood higher saw farther. When predators hid in the grass, when the slightest sound could signal claws and fangs, upright legs became the eyes of vigilance. Standing was not merely a result of skeletal structure, was an evolutionary choice under the pressure of observation, a way to record and respond promptly to changes in the surroundings. Walking on two legs freed the hands. Hands, once clinging to branches, were now free to carry, to grasp, to experiment. In those hands, a sharp stone could be a weapon, a fragment of bone could become a tool, and every movement became a lesson recorded in the body. Hunger demanded speed in eating, and predators could return at any moment. The speed of processing food became a matter of survival. Sharpening observation, hand-eye coordination, and the ability to anticipate danger on the grasslands. In front of an antelope carcass, every second carried the weight of survival. Without fangs to tear, without claws to slash, the hand learned to transform surrounding objects into extensions of the body. A sharp stone could pierce skin. A piece of bone could separate flesh. When stone struck stone, the spark of thought ignited in the silence. Not a fire of flame, but the light of a new reflex. If what I need does not exist, create it. From the need to see far, humans learned to stand. From the need to eat quickly, humans learned to craft. And in that combination, upright posture and hands that could think, the seed of a new species formed, a species capable of predicting the future, preparing for what had not yet occurred, not merely reacting on instinct, but learning to combine experience with observation, turning a harsh environment into the first classroom, where every moment of hunger, every gust of wind stirring the grass, every groan of decay became valuable data, accumulated for the evolution of human thought and intelligence. No invention was accidental. All began with a simple need, but one pushed to the limit by hunger, fear, and time. From that moment, the earth no longer merely nurtured life. It began to forge the human mind, turning every stone, every footprint, every act of survival into data etched deeply into the instincts and memory of this new species, around 2.6 million years ago. In the arid lands of East Africa, among valleys, there were once mouths of ancient volcanoes. The first stones were struck apart by the hands of early humans, not by chance, not a random act. Each strike was the result of observation, memory, and repeated experimentation across generations. With every mistake and success preserved in the body and behavior, a living repository of experience, the Oldowan technology, named after the Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania, represents the earliest evidence of intentional craftsmanship. It was not merely picking up a sharp-edged stone, but understanding that stone could become sharp, could become a tool, and could alter the relationship between the creature and its environment. When one stone was struck against another at a specific angle, the resulting fragment formed a cutting edge capable of slicing skin, separating flesh, splitting bone, carving tubers, or shaping wood. These stone fragments, though crude, contained within them a structure of causal thinking. Action gives result, gives application. In the hands of late Australopithecus, or earlier Homo habilis, Alduin tools became extensions of the body. The hand no longer merely touched the world. It reshaped the world according to intention, turning every strike into an answer to the question of survival. And for the first time in the history of life, predictive thought appeared. The creature understood that what it did today could hold value tomorrow, and that the outcome depended not only on muscles, but on thought, sequence, and choice. The stone fragments found in sediment layers across Ethiopia, Kenya, and Tanzania reveal a pattern of deliberate repetition, not the randomness of nature. The angles of strikes, the directions of flake removal, and the flat surfaces reflect a collective learning process passed from individual to individual, from generation to generation. Within those sediments, cut-marked animal bones have been found, demonstrating that tools were used to process carcasses, removing meat, extracting marrow, slicing tendons, separating joints. Bone marrow, rich in energy, was a precious reward in a scarce environment. But more important than energy, Alduin opened the possibility of sequential thinking. Before acting, one must imagine the outcome. Before cutting, one must choose the stone. Before choosing the stone, one must visualize the line of the cut. This is the precursor to logic, the foundation of symbolic intelligence that would come later. Alduin tools, therefore, were not merely stone fragments. They were the first voice of the human mind, not yet language, but already a grammar of shapes, edges, and motion, where each strike, each cut angle, was an answer to the problem of survival. And as the sound of stone striking stone echoed through the valleys of wind, the earth recorded the resonance of a great moment, the moment when survival began to take the form of thought, when the hand learned to create what had never existed, and the mind began to envision the future from the presenter, turning point witnessed silently, yet powerfully, by both the planet and humankind, in a world of hunters and the hunted. The earliest human cognition remained tied to the immediate moment. Every action took place within the range of sight, within the reach of the hand, within earshot, within the measured distance of danger. Compared to its Australopithecus ancestors, the brain of Homo habilis had expanded regions related to manipulation and coordination, allowing more refined hand-eye coordination, yet it remained a reactive brain where action arose directly from stimuli, and decisions existed only within the limits of immediate survival. There was no long-term plan, no abstraction, only object and response. At this stage, tools were more biological than cultural. When teeth were insufficiently sharp, a stone became a new tooth. When nails were too weak, a broken pebble became a substitute claw. Each object was used to extend the boundaries of the body, but only briefly when the task was done. It was discarded, a temporary extension of the body. There was no concept of owning tools, only the behavior of using them. Survival did not require retention, only knowledge of where to find them. Tools carried no memory, were not prepared in advance, had no stable form. They existed as reactions, immediate, specific, and inseparable from context, a stone to cut meat, a branch to break bone, a log to ward off predators. Yet within this limitation, a fundamental principle of intelligence emerged. The hand could transform neutral objects into extensions of the body. That moment when the boundary between the body and the external material blurred was the first step of tool cognition. This reactive intelligence had not yet learned to accumulate knowledge, but it already recognized the relationship between action and outcome, understanding that each strike, each cut produced a tangible, predictable result. This was the seed of causality, the beginning of the evolution of deliberate thought. Amid the thirst for energy across the dry, rocky plains, it was this very capacity to respond that allowed Homo habilis to maintain a foothold on the evolutionary ladder. Time passed with the slow rhythm of geology, yet within that silence, an invisible transformation unfolded inside the skull of the ancient biped. Nerves, muscles, and life experience began to weave a more complex network of cognition, linking behavior with consequence, reflex with solution, and need with tools. The last individuals of Homo habilis gradually merged into the flow of evolution, giving way to a new form, Homo ergaster, also known as the upright craftsman. Not only taller, but thinking farther. Africa's climate had lost stability. Northern glacial cycles oscillated global temperatures, triggering fluctuations in rainfall. Forests receded toward the equator, and grasslands expanded into vast, arid seas of gold. Herds of antelope, buffalo, and ancient horses migrated seasonally, and with them, prehistoric humans began abandoning old haunts, learning to anticipate the paths of prey, not merely reacting, but planning ahead. In that world, a stone was no longer simply picked up and discarded. Homo ergaster knew how to select suitable rocks, remove unwanted flakes to create balanced cutting edges, guide fracture lines with skillful turns of the wrist, and coordinate multiple actions to maximize efficiency, striking one stone at a particular angle to separate meat, flaking another to sharpen a wood edge, or holding a larger rock as a stable base. The brain now did more than react to stimuli, programmed behavior, visualizing outcomes before acting. Every step, every choice, testified to evolving thought, from instinctive reflex to deliberate planning, from temporary action to long-term tools, from a body merely existing to a body shaping and exploiting its world. This was no longer reflexive action. It was action informed by foresight. Thought had broken free from the immediate moment, entering the realm of intention. Each Achillean tool, with its symmetry, sharpness, and deliberately flaked surfaces, was a material trace of the first abstract idea. To create it required a mental image of the desired outcome. The mind constructed the template before the hand touched the stone. Tools were no longer mere extensions of the body. They reflected inner cognition. They were not temporary instruments, but realizations of thought, abstractions of need made tangible, from mind to hand, from hand to world. At the same time, organization in hunting and sharing began to change. Food was no longer consumed on the spot, but brought back to shelters, to safety. These actions implied something new, awareness of the near future, of tomorrow, of companions, of remaining resources. A social mechanism began to form: cooperation, sharing, observation, and learning from one another. For the first time in history, the intelligence of life learned to delay action for long-term benefit. Reactive perception evolved into foresight, where every step, every strike of stone, every choice carried immediate purpose and anticipated consequence. And when a symmetrical stone emerged from the hands of two facing humans, the human mind began to confront itself, recognizing the ability to arrange the world instead of merely reacting to it. By then, the Earth had entered the alternating cold and warm rhythm of the first glacial period. Polar ice sheets advanced and retreated. Sea levels rose and fell by hundreds of meters, creating temporary land bridges connecting continent paths that Homo erectus would later use to leave Africa. The climate was drier, harsher. The last humid forests of East Africa shrank into fragments, exposing expansive grasslands and semi-deserts scattered with stones, sand, and red dust. Strong winds whipped across the land, carrying basalt dust, volcanic ash, and the dry heat of the interior, making the open spaces even more unforgiving, exposing every movement. Rain was scarce. Water gathered into shallow basins where footprints of animals and ancient humans were imprinted in fossilized mud. Ecosystems shifted. Herbivores moved in large, cyclical herds, while predators such as saber-toothed cats and giant hyenas continued to dominate the plains. The openness exposed all movements. Hiding was no longer an effective survival strategy. Survivors had to anticipate and move, constantly finding safe spots, water, and warm ground as cold seasons arrived. In this environment, Homo erectus's brain not only predicted danger but calculated distance, time, and resources. Homo erectus arose under these conditions. Tall, upright, with a broad chest and long legs, this species became humanity's first true migrant. Journeys of hundreds of kilometers were no longer limits. Physiology adapted for endurance sweating to cool the body, upright gait optimized for long distances, and increasingly sophisticated spatial memory. Within this harsh natural tableau, one invention would permanently alter the course of life: fire. From the embers of lightning or volcanoes, Homo erectus learned to preserve fire, gradually mastering the ability to kindle it, carrying light and warmth to dark, cold places, from caves to distant grasslands. Fire became the center of life, community, and thought, warming, protection, cooking, extending survival, and simultaneously nourishing the mind where the light of fire illuminated the first ideas of a world shaped by hand and intellect. The flame did more than ward off predators. It opened a new window for cognition, the first light piercing the long night of evolution. The environment was diverse, from Africa's dry savannah to sparse forests and temperate zones of Asia. From the rift valleys of East Africa, Homo erectus began to step out from the continent where ancestors had evolved for millions of years. Ahead were no longer merely red-dusted plains, but a multi-layered world where sandstorms, thin snow, and forest rains could follow one another within months of travel, and where each step concealed new survival challenges. In Africa, the environment remained dry grasslands, sun-cracked soils, and seasonally available water. Tall grasses swayed, dust covered the footprints of animals. There, the erectus body learned endurance-sustained hunting, enduring long thirsts, tracking prey across vast landscapes observable with upright vision. Endurance required not only physical strength, but also survival intelligence, choosing the right moment to move, assessing risks, predicting the direction of prey. Entering Asia, the world changed. Sparse forests of the Middle East opened ahead, followed by rocky highlands of Iran and cold, misty mountain ranges of northern India. Temperate climates with harsh winters forced Homo erectus to learn to keep warm, store food, and adapt life rhythms to the seasons. Space became multi-layered: daytime heat or cold wind, nighttime freezing, rain and mist all coexisting, demanding precise bodily adaptation. Farther afield in Java, China, and even southern Europe, Homo erectus confronted an almost global range of climates: humid jungles, coastlines, river plains, volcanic regions, and scattered snow. Life was no longer uniform. It required adaptive diversity, the first evidence of a species capable of flexible transformation according to terrain and climate. Learning from the environment to survive, these changes shaped not only the body but also expanded cognitive experience. Every new land presented a challenge: different rocks, different animals, different plants, and different ways to survive. It was precisely this constant rotation that developed the mind of Homo erectus, thought no longer confined to local surroundings, but beginning to generalize, to observe, to compare, to learn anew from the environment. When Homo erectus abandoned the familiar grasslands of East Africa, the world before them was no longer limited. No human before had ventured so far. Small groups moved along dried river corridors, following the trails of herds, or simply because water sources had vanished after long dry seasons. Every step unveiled a new landscape and a new risk. Along this journey, tools were no longer mere aids, but conditions of survival. A properly flaked stone could serve as a knife, an axe, or even a shield. Without functional tools, Homo erectus could not butcher game, dig roots, or defend against predators. Climate and terrain changed constantly. Grasslands, forests, coastlines, rocky plains, volcanoes, and scattered snow in northern extremes. No single tool could be perfect for all conditions. Yet Homo erectus created the first form capable of adapting everywhere: the Acheulean hand. Its symmetrical teardrop shape, pointed tip for piercing, sharp edges for cutting, and heavy body for chopping embodied a design so enduring that for nearly 1,000,000 years, humanity saw no need to change it. It was not merely an object, but a transformation of thought. The tool became a sign of intelligence, a symbol of foresight and coordinated action in a diverse and harsh world. With every strike, every flake removed, Homo erectus did not just shape matter, they cultivated abstraction, understanding that outcomes could be prefigured, that actions today prepared for the needs of tomorrow, and that survival was no longer a simple reflex, but a chain of anticipatory choices. This flexibility of thought, combined with physical endurance and the Acheulean, laid the foundation for a species capable of conquering any environment and beginning a global journey. Migration forced Homo erectus to carry not only the physical tool, but also the memory of its form. Stones in one place differed from those elsewhere, yet the mental template for creating a cutting edge remained in the mind. Remembering the tool meant remembering how to craft either angles, the force of the strike, the direction of the flake, storing material knowledge within the body itself. For the first time, material knowledge was preserved beyond a single location, carried within the body, a primitive form of cultural memory where thought and action combined into a continuous learning sequence. Thousands of generations of extended movement created a fusion of mechanics, memory, and abstract intelligence, transforming Homo erectus into the first humans to truly understand survival in a vast world. Their environment was no longer the warm savannas of the equator. Migrating groups crossed dry plains and entered the cold regions of Eurasia, where monsoon winds swept through valleys and long nights covered the land. Temperatures could fall to levels where the naked body could no longer survive. After sunset, no light or warmth remained beyond the heat of fatigued muscles, and the silent expanse echoed only with human breath, the rustle of wind, and constant vigilance against hidden predators. In such conditions, fire was not merely illumination, but a boundary between life and death. A small flame could extend night into day, drive away predators, dry animal hides, soften food, warm the body, and create a hub of activity during long nights. But to have fire, Homo erectus had to know how to maintain it, not merely encounter it. Charred remains found in sediments at Gesher Banot, Yaakov, Israel, Kobi, Fora, Kenya, and Shaokudian China testify to this understanding active control rather than passive use of nature. Maintaining fire was not only protection but planning, preparing fuel, building containment, regulating heat, and sustaining a reliable energy source. Fire transformed the biological rhythm of Homo erectus. It allowed extended activity after sunset, expanded habitation into cold and damp regions, and turned temporary camps into centers of energy and social life. At the same time, the need for shelter became critical. Rock overhangs, branch coverings, or riverine caves created microclimates, retaining warmth around the fire and forming the first communal spaces. The environment no longer completely dictated survival. For the first time in evolutionary history, a human species had broken the natural laws of thermodynamics, creating an artificial microclimate in the cold night, paving the way for a new form of survival, sovereignty, controlling energy, actively organizing space and matter for long-term benefit. As Homo erectus populations began to move far from the African savannas, the journey was measured not in steps but in generations, along routes crossing rivers, dunes, and cold lands. Life could not rely on chance. Every mistake was paid for with hunger or death. Under such conditions, a single tool, durable and versatile enough, became the centerpiece of survival strategy. No longer mere flaked stones used briefly, Homo erectus required a replicable form, one that could be carried, prepared, and ready when needed. From this emerged the concept of standardization, subtle yet revolutionary shift. It not only preserved knowledge during migrations, but also laid the foundation for cultural transmission. The hand axe template resided not only in the craftsman's hands, but also in memory, ready to be passed down to the next generation. The sequence of action: selecting stone, flaking, shaping a cutting edge, using and maintaining became the first framework of technique. And Homo erectus became a species capable of storing ideas beyond the immediate moment, opening the first era of tool culture and planned intelligence. Each Acheulean hand axe was not merely a tool but a cognitive template. It demonstrated that actions had been envisioned in advance, and the hand had learned to reproduce consistent ideas across space and time. The mind of Homo erectus was therefore no longer tethered to the present. It extended into the future, a future long enough to set out, to prepare, to survive in lands never seen before. The emergence of standardized tools signaled an intelligence learning to anticipate, predicting conditions, organizing actions, and preparing solutions. In evolutionary history, this was the first appearance of the notion of carrying both matter and idea. From then on, the journey of Homo erectus was not only biological migration, but a movement of consciousness, of a mind beginning to design the world around it. On ancient plains, where wind swept across dry grass and volcanic ash still mingled with the soil, Homo erectus groups held a new form of thought design thinking. The stone was no longer simply grasped. It was shaped according to a precise mental image. Before the hand touched the stone's surface, the mind had already formed the image of a symmetrical cutting edge, a smooth curve, a central point. Each flake struck was a decision. Each fragment that broke away was the result of calculation and force control. The prehistoric craftsman, without drawings, without language still, arranged each angle, each surface, so the stone became most effective in hand. It was no longer reaction to circumstance, but the mind imposing order on matter. The Herculean hand axe was born as a standard technical model spread across thousands of generations and tens of thousands of miles. From the Rift Valley in East Africa to the plains of the Ganges, to the Mediterranean shores, and even into Europe. That symmetrical shape retained its essence. This indicates the emergence of collective memory, a form of technical tradition, extending beyond the individual. Within each hand axe resided notions of order and aesthetics, of how the world could be shaped according to intention. And when Homo erectus gazed upon the shaped stone, perhaps for the first time, awareness of beauty appeared, the beauty of function, of symmetry, of control. Herculean technology was thus not merely a technical advancement. It was the first evidence of design capability, when life learned to recreate the world according to mental images. From this point, tool intelligence officially departed from reflex and entered the era of intent, design and foresight, the ability to visualize. A complete tool before it existed and control matter with each strike. Each fire mark became defining characteristics of Homo erectus. At this stage, the mind no longer merely reacted to the environment. It acted upon it with planning and imagination. Each chosen stone was deliberate. It was inspected by eye, measured by hand, then flaked along a predetermined axis. The gaze no longer stopped at the present, but reached toward the future of the to love, the object that would exist after action, anticipating both its use and the environment's response to it. Through this process, Homo erectus began to remember not only operational skills, but also outcomes over time. How stone edges retained sharpness, how fire softened roots or meat, how tools were arranged in the camp space to maximize survival efficiency. Each hand axe became a lesson accumulated not just for the individual, but for the group, for the lineage. Form and function were united, creating a primitive abstract thought. Homo erectus not only manipulated, but planned, predicted, and designed, laying the foundation for all future human intellectual advances. In this capacity, fire too came under control. From the charred remnants of lightning strikes and volcanoes, prehistoric humans learned to preserve flame as they preserved life itself. If a tool was an extension of the hand, fire was an extension of the mind, the first energy tamed, the first light of designed environment. Time passed, hundreds of thousands of years slipping by in the silence of geology. Ash from old fires was buried, fading into new sediment layers. Yet alongside that ash, something else was transmitted, the memory of skill. Homo erectus gradually disappeared from the African savannas and Eurasian plains. The lineage branched. Some remained in Africa, evolving into early Homo sapiens forms. Others migrated farther northwest, following the long arc of a cooling climate, eventually settling in the harsh lands of Europe where winters stretched long and ice began to descend. There, in frozen valleys and damp pine forests, a new form emerged. Homo neanderthalensis, the robust-boned people, broad-chested, thickly muscled, adapted to the cold. Their bodies were organized to retain heat, maintain strength under conditions where breath could freeze into mist. And the chill was not only felt, but continuously challenged every biological function. If Homo erectus carried fire out of Africa, the Neanderthals preserved it amid ice, making it the center of a more complex life. From them, tools became more sophisticated, flaked and shaped in multiple steps, specialized for specific purposes. Stone knives, spear points, and hand axes were crafted not only for hunting but also for preparation, storage, and optimization during long winters. Their treatment of bones, hides, fire, and hunting demonstrates an intelligence capable of organization and role distribution, assigning tasks according to ability and circumstance. In cold caves, ash, burned bones, and orderly arranged objects reveal the presence of thought, not only technical but symbolics the first seeds of memory, tradition, and culture. Small objects arranged in patterns, perhaps storing tools, food, or ornaments, hint at awareness of space and time and the human relationship with the surrounding world. Homo erectus taught humans to carry fire. Homo neanderthalensis, within that fire, learned to see themselves in peers, in the group, in death, and in the first shadows of commemoration. They created pauses in the harsh flow of nature, where the light and heat of fire combined with hands that knew how to shape matter to construct living spaces. The world then unfolded in the cold rhythm of the Pleistocene, as glaciers poured south from the northern poles, cutting across Eurasia. The climate fluctuated violently. Glacial periods alternated with brief, warm phases, leaving landscapes in constant flux between sparse forests, cold grasslands, and ice-swept deserts across much of Europe. Winters extended for more than half the year. Winds swept through valleys thick with frost, and every breath carried an energy cost. Rain, snow, and hoarfrost alternated, covering the vegetation and creating cycles of scarcity and abundance, forcing Neanderthals to remember the locations of water sources, hunting grounds, and safe shelters. In this context, only the most adaptable survived. Giant animals, mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, aurochs, reindeer dominated the icy plains. Predators, cave lions, ancient hyenas, giant bears lurked along mountain passes, compelling Neanderthals to calculate routes, timing, and defensive strategies. This was a world where a small mistake could lead to extinction, where survival depended not merely on physical strength but on sophisticated, adaptive strategies. At the heart of this scene, Neanderthals evolved. Low, sturdy bodies, thick skulls, broad noses, each a mark of adaptation to cold climates. Every centimeter of bone, every muscle reflected the survival pressures of an unforgiving environment, where cold came not only from wind but from time itself, where each step, each strike of a tool, and each fire became a test of skill, intelligence, and endurance. They did not merely endure the ice. They learned to construct an order of life, a balance of energy, strength, and intellect where survival became an art of calculation, both harsh and supple. Europe and Western Asia during the Ice Age, lands of tundra, sparse conifer forests, and cold grasslands stretching for thousands of miles lay under the direct influence of the Pleistocene glacial cycles, with climates oscillating between extreme cold and brief warmth. Each thaw brought forests. Each return of the ice withdrew them, leaving bare plains with winds carrying tiny ice crystals, freezing the ground and coating it with frost year-round. Only a few low plants survived. Scattered grasses and small spongy plants provided minimal food for the giant animals of the Ageamaths: wally, rhinoceros, aurochs, and northern reindeer, migrating seasonally, following the rare grasses at snow edges, creating a mobile and challenging ecosystem. The sky was grey and dim, light diffused through a frost-laden atmosphere. Nights were long, the sun low and weak, and average annual temperatures rarely rose above freezing. In this landscape, all life faced energetic pressures. Every unit of heat, every morsel of food became a determinant of survival. This was the harsh ecology in which Neanderthals appeared, evolved, and became specialists of the frozen world where bodily strength, territorial knowledge, and precise cooperation determined the line between survival and extinction. During the extreme climate fluctuations of the Pleistocene, winters were no longer short cycles within a year, but snow covered the land for months, halting plant growth. The only energy lay in the bodies of large animals: mammoths, aurochs, reindeer, woolly rhinoceroses, mobile, stores of caloric wealth moving between ice and dry grass. To survive, Neanderthals had to exploit this biomass fully. Gathering plants was insufficient, waiting for warmth impossible. Each hunt was a gamble between life and death. Specialized hunting tools, the Mousterian axe, from pointed spear tips and skin scrapers to versatile cutting edges, were crafted with astonishing precision and efficiency. Each stone blade resulted from a systematic sequence, selecting appropriate stone, flaking, grooving, smoothing, all aimed at optimizing productivity in accessing giant prey and quickly processing food in a harsh environment where every passing minute carried survival value. Yet, despite the sophistication of their tools, Neanderthals made few innovations over tens of thousands of years. Their thinking emphasized skill, mathematical perfecting, the use of existing tools to ensure each action was executed with maximum precision. Each individual, each group, trained themselves for accurate handling, transmitting techniques and procedures across generations. Unlike Homo sapiens, Neanderthals did not seek to combine tools or create variants beyond immediate necessity. Their tools reflected stable thought, directly linked to survival pressures, long winters, large animal hunting, and resource optimization. This mindset ensured absolute survival within familiar territory, but limited expansion and adaptation to novel or rapidly changing environments. In other words, Neanderthals were masters of present skills, but had not yet developed predictive thinking and tool innovation, the capacities Homo sapiens would soon cultivate. This extreme specialization highlighted an evolutionary truth. Mastery preserves survival, but innovation opens paths for expansion and exceptional adaptation. In that frozen world, energy pressure and harsh conditions shaped Neanderthal intellect into a refined tactical thinking, closely linked to mechanical skill, spatial awareness, and group coordination, the foundation of survival specialization, unmatched by any earlier humans. Each step across thick ice, each hunting decision, and each tool flake reflected a careful calculation between risk and reward, forming a profound tactical intelligence where every centimeter of behavior was measured to sustain life. These skills became a species heritage transmitted across tens of thousands of years, keeping Neanderthals resilient in the face of nature's severe trials. In much of Ice Age Eurasia, flint was not always readily available. Silica deposits were buried beneath ice or distant from seasonal camps. Moving across frozen valleys made accessing raw material more energetically costly than ever. In this context, each stone held real survival value. Random flaking, as practiced by Homo erectus, was no longer suitable. Neanderthals had to conserve material, use every fragment, and plan the sequence from raw core to finished tool, turning each stone into part of a survival strategy. From this necessity arose Levallois technique, a process involving foresight and premeditation. The craftsman selected a stone core, shaped its surface, and controlled the fracture direction to produce a perfect cutting edge. It was no longer strike-break-bic, but a structured thought process where matter was molded according to mental vision, and the mind began simulating results before acting. Across the frozen expanses of ancient Europe, where wind carried ice dust and snow blanketed barren plains, survival depended entirely on the energy stored in the flesh of massive prey. Woolly rhinoceroses, mammoths, and aurochs became both essential nutrition and the highest survival challenge, demanding planning, coordination, and precise tools to avoid wasting energy with every hunt. In this environment, tools were no longer merely instruments of defense, but extensions of hunting strategy and energy conservation. 2 fell animals weighing tons, high-penetration spear tips were required, shafts secured with natural adhesive and dried sinew. To survive the cold, scrapers, awls, and crude needles processed hides into clothing and shelters and preserved food. Each implement became a specialized branch of survival knowledge, reflecting thought-oriented toward refinement. Neanderthal hands did not merely create tools. They designed each for a specific purpose, each action meticulously calculated to achieve maximum efficiency under scarcity and danger. Within the glacial sediments of the Ice Age, fragments of stone bear traces of a new kind of thought, systematic thought. Neanderthals no longer struck pebbles by instinct alone. They prepared the stone cores in advance, calculating fracture lines, impact force, and the direction of flake removal, as if each step had been visualized and pre-programmed in the mind. The Levallois technique emerged as a turning point, the ability to imagine the shape of a flake before it detached from the core, meaning the brain had learned to organize a sequence of actions through 3-dimensional space and over time. The flakes were not random. They were selected, refined, and reshaped into knives, spear points, or scrapers, reflections not only of individual skill but of collective technical standards shared by the group through the dust of time. What appears is no longer a solitary figure napping stone, but a process, a sequence of actions transmitted, repeated, and refined across generations. It was a system of knowledge, no longer reactive, but structural, where every movement was remembered. Every gesture became part of a cognitive map of action. To achieve this required procedural memory, a rudimentary form of language for instruction, coordination within groups, and an understanding of the relationship between raw material, tool, and intended outcome. Thus, tools became more than physical objects. They became the collective memory of a species where each flake, each scar, each finished edge embodied the convergence of intellect, skill, and survival strategy preserved through time. In the frozen valleys of the Ice Age, where flint was rarer than metal, Homo neanderthalensis learned to calculate every strike, no longer random blows, but an organized sequence, selecting the core, identifying the platform, removing the outer crust, then releasing thin, sharp flakes one by one. From a single core, multiple tools could emerge, each flake used for a distinct function: a spear tip, a knife, a scraper, or a tendon-severing blade. It was a logic of economy, not born of scarcity, but of understanding. Each stone became a closed system where every fracture was anticipated, every surface had purpose, and every gesture was tied directly to the survival of the group. Such precision demanded operational memory, sequential reasoning, and the capacity to visualize an outcome before it existed. Signs of structured intelligence, no longer bound to immediate reflex. When the firelight flickered across the scattered lava flakes on a cave floor, each shard revealed itself as part of a larger plan, a fragment of an organized technological chain, a map of cognition carved in stone. That systematic thought opened the path to something deeper: cooperation, instruction, and the preservation of knowledge as a shared legacy. Children learned from elders, every motion, every strike angle repeated until mastery, a lived experience, a silent language of hand and stone, as the Ice Age still gripped the earth in its frozen hold. Among the pale glaciers and sparse European forests, the footprints of Homo neanderthalensis pressed deep into frozen mud. Small groups gathered around the fire, hunting the great herds, preserving knowledge through skill and memory. Fire became the center of existence: warmth, food, defense, and social communion. But farther south, where the African plains still breathed with heat, another lineage of humankind was forming. Early Homo sapiens emerged not through sudden mutation, but through a long refinement of cognition. The brain expanded slightly, the frontal lobes grew broader, neural connections between memory and language became denser, allowing abstract thought, spatial recall, and preparation for the future. In the same world, two human species saw the same fire, the same stone, yet one saw a tool, while the other began to see meaning. Around 300,000 years ago, Homo sapiens carried their fire out of Africa. They moved through the land once inhabited by Homo erectus, crossed the Middle East, and entered Europe, where Neanderthals had ruled for hundreds of millennia. The two met, exchanged tools, even into bread. But beneath the cold ash of the Ice Age, a silent shift unfolded. Language began to take structure. Imagination wove symbols, and the sense of self, of community, of mortality grew sharper than ever before. Space was no longer merely shelter, but a setting that could be remembered, narrated, and imagined. Life could now be planned, foreseen, and preserved. From that threshold, human history entered a new epoch, the age of symbols, carvings, and meaningful sound. Homo sapiens, endowed with minds that could look back and envision forward, began to write the next chapter of life on Earth. After hundreds of thousands of years across the African plains, Homo sapiens lifted their gaze beyond the horizon. From the Red Sea to the Levantine plains, across the Arabian deserts and into the rainforests of Southeast Asia, small groups began to move, not out of curiosity alone, but compelled by shifting climates, dwindling water, and the pursuit of energy. Each step was memory in motion, a test of planning, prediction, and adaptation. They carried not only fire, stone, and food, but knowledge, skill, and the beginnings of culture. The glaciers lowered sea levels, exposing natural land bridges between continents, linking Africa to Asia, then to Europe, and later to Australia. Homo sapiens did not merely migrate. They radiated intelligence across the globe, bringing with them language, oral memory, and symbolic art, expanding not only territory but awareness. Yet the world they entered was unforgiving. In Europe, they faced cold and the lingering presence of Neanderthals, beings adapted to deep frost, hunters of giant beasts, keepers of fire amid snow and wind. In Asia, they met humid jungles, erupting volcanoes, violent rivers, and deserts of stone. In Australia, and later the Americas, the great megafauna began to vanish under human pressure and climatic change, leaving behind ecological voids that Homo sapiens learned to fill. Within this shifting world, survival pressure became creative pressure. Instead of adapting through the body, Homo sapiens adapted through the mind. Tools, language, community, ritual, and symbol all became parts of a secondary biosphere. An intellectual ecology enveloping the body, where memory, skill, and imagination became the new currency of life. It was the era when human cognition no longer merely reacted to nature, but began to reconstruct it, step by step, gesture by gesture, tool by tool. From every new landscape, from every challenge of geography, arose cultural variation, different ways of seeing the world, all rooted in a single instinct, to remember, to predict, and to recreate. Hunting methods, shelter design, and patterns of gathering were forged through experiment, observation, and communication, forming the first networks of knowledge beyond the individual. When ancient Homo sapiens left Africa, the planet was no longer a single, monotonous landscape. Each step carried the species into a new kind of world where wind, temperature, and geology demanded fresh forms of adaptation. In East Africa and the Arabian Peninsula, violent climate oscillations turned dry grasslands into deserts, where sand poured through fingers like molten grains and water became as rare as gold. In Southeast Asia, constant rain covered every surface with green moss, dampening tools, clothing, and shelters, forcing Homo sapiens to learn to dry, preserve, and construct moisture-resistant dwellings. Across the Iranian Plateau and the Himalayas, thin, freezing air became an enemy of breath, demanding both bodily adjustment and intelligent movement. Meanwhile, along the coasts of the Indian and Pacific Oceans, tides, coral reefs, and marine life opened an entirely new source of sustenance, the first contact with food from the sea. There, humans learned to craft fishhooks, light spears, and techniques for preserving marine harvests. No single environment remained constant. Homo sapiens had to learn to change themselves. The ability to predict weather, remember routes, observe water currents and terrain, and utilize local materials became fundamental skills of survival. Each environment posed a new equation and, for the first time in history, the human mind began to create as a way to exist. The need to design flexible tools capable of quick adaptation to every kind of landscape and food source, from coastal fish and forest, birds, to small mammals on the steppe stimulated abstract thinking, the merging of techniques and ecological awareness. The world of early Homo sapiens was no longer confined to a single type of landscape. Each group had to engineer its own survival strategy. Every land was its own ecosystem, with harsh laws demanding instant reaction. On the coasts, survival depended on transforming pebbles and shells into sharp knives, hooks, and light spearheads, or building temporary shelters from bamboo and palm leaves. In dense forests, where vision was obstructed and prey concealed, survival required short spears, traps, and throwing tools, along with navigation skills and coordinated teamwork. On arid grasslands, speed and group cohesion became the deciding factors in pursuing antelope. Wild horses, or even small elephants, were each movement. Each shout and each synchronized step formed a living strategy of survival. It was no longer instinctive reaction, but a chain of calculated behaviors, a living design of intelligence shaped by adversity. Each land, each geographical trial became a stimulus for the growth of intellect and culture. By observing animal movements, modifying tools to suit need, and learning to build shelters or preserve food, ancient Homo sapiens transformed the world into a controllable, predictable, and narratable space. This was the moment when humanity ceased merely to exist, began to construct. Survival turned into creation, and the mind itself became the most powerful tool of life. No single tool was enough for every place. To overcome that, Homo sapiens invented flexibility, the capacity to observe swiftly, memorize the laws of terrain, and craft suitable implements for each situation. Out of this harsh diversity, technical imagination emerged, the kind of reasoning that could turn material into function, combine components for efficiency, and anticipate outcomes before acting at the same time. Earth was home to more than one human lineage. Neanderthals still occupied the frozen lands of Europe. Denisovans lingered in the highlands of Asia and Siberia, and Homo erectus in East Asia continued the old hunting traditions. Across the planet, multiple lineages coexisted, sharing territories, resources, and at times competing as mutual threats. The arrival of ancient Homo sapiens ignited a fierce evolutionary trial. It was not muscle that determined survival, but the speed of learning. The newcomers brought composite tools, hafted spear points, primitive bows and arrows, thin blades carved from carefully chosen stone. They harnessed fire to temper wood, distilled natural resin for adhesives, and hunted in agile, cooperative groups in a world where a single mistake could mean extinction. Technology became an evolutionary shield, not merely a weapon, but a symbol of strategic thought. Intelligence could now calculate energy, distance, and time. From that point, Homo sapiens began to diverge from their archaic kin, entering an age where cognition, not anatomy, defined existence. As they spread across continents, Homo sapiens confronted not only new climates and prey, but also the limitations of their own hands and materials. Survival could no longer depend on a single instrument. It required a system of tools, intouchable, detachable, recyclable, and improvable components. From that necessity came blades hafted into wooden handles, spear points fixed with resin, and bowstrings woven from sinew and plant fibers. Each advancement arose from a chain of ideas, selecting materials, applying heat, binding, testing, and refining. Humanity was no longer shaping matter, alone it was shaping process. Actions were organized into deliberate sequences, synchronized to amplify efficiency in both hunting and tool-making. In that moment, the human intellect transcended biology. The hand no longer merely held tools, it held the concept of design, the ability to create means that could give rise to new means. Here, the true spark of creativity was lit, the dawn of abstraction, when a tool became not just a physical object, but a reflection of layered, recursive thought. In the hands of ancient Homo sapiens, material was no longer confined to stone. Hollow bones, animal horns, and ivory, once parts of other lives, were reshaped into fishhooks, needles, and spear tips. From fragile organic matter, humans opened a new world of supple, precise tools suited for ever-changing environments. With the birth of projectile weapons, hunting distance expanded. The otlatol, or spear thrower, magnified the arm's force. The bow and arrow stored tension as energy, releasing it in controlled arcs allowing the hunter to strike larger, swifter prey while keeping the body safe. When combined with group strategy, deception of prey, and food preservation for the cold seasons, ancient Homo sapiens became a mobile engine of intellect where thought, material, and coordination converged into a form of survival unmatched in any other species on Earth. ChatGPT, Genoi. This was not merely an improvement in efficiency, was a restructuring of cognition itself. The brain learned to imagine trajectories, to calculate timing, and to predict the prey's movement before the act occurred. Within these tools lay more than stone and bone. There were concepts of motion, cause, and consequence. The tool became an experiment of imagination, and imagination became a second tool, intangible, yet more enduring than any material substance. In ancient Homo sapiens, thought transcended the act of making. The brain began to unite the separate principles of nature, the curvature of a bow, the compression of a string, the inertia of an arrow into a new system where matter operated according to idea. For the first time in evolutionary history, tools were no longer mere reactions to environment. They became combinations of concepts: force, direction, balance, and efficiency. Each invention was a living physics experiment, a curved bone as a lever, a dry tendon storing tension, a small stone bound to a wooden shaft transferring motion from flesh to air. Through such acts, intelligence and matter merged, and humanity stepped into a new form of awareness design, cognition. In those creations, Homo sapiens no longer shaped the world merely with hands, but with mental models, the ability to foresee reactions, to visualize trajectories, to compute results. A tool was no longer just an object, but an idea cast into material form, a reflection of the abstract architecture, taking shape within the human mind. After hundreds of thousands of years of holding stones, striking flints, and casting spears, Homo sapiens began to chip away at the darkness within the mind itself. Fire no longer only warmed the body, it illuminated the unseen, the realm of ideas. Deep within caves, where torchlight trembled against damp walls, the first pigments stretched across stone handprints, contours, herds. These were no longer tools of survival, but tools of memory. A painting did not aid the hunt nor secure food for winter, but it preserved an imager, new method of resisting disappearance. When the hand touched the cave wall, it created a symbol, something that existed beyond the physical, yet lived within collective awareness. Abstract thought had opened. Sound became language. Rhythm became ritual. Image became myth. The coordination of hand, eye, and brain, once trained through tool-making, was now restructured to form humanity's first semiotic layer. In it, every line, every sound, every beat was a shared conventioner, mental pact connecting individuals not only across space, but through time. Lascaux, Altamira, and Chauvet were not merely shelters. They were the first cathedrals of consciousness, places where Homo sapiens discovered the ability to inscribe identity through symbol. There, the species no longer existed purely in biology, but redefined itself through thought, through the power to see, imagine, and communicate experience. Stone, bone, fire, and pigment all became languages of imagination, where every material carried meaning. The world was no longer only seen. It was recreated within the mind, becoming a mental map where past, present, and future converged and were shaped by human intellect. With that act, the evolution of the body drew to a close, and the evolution of the idea began. From this moment, the final tool of humankind, the symbol would not merely alter the external world, but reconstruct the very reality that perceived it. The Holocene opened a new rhythm of life on Earth. Temperatures steadied. Rainfall became regular, valleys thawed, and rivers ran year-round, feeding soils of unprecedented fertility. Grasslands, riverine forests, and wetlands turned into reliable reservoirs of food, where seeds could fall and grow without fear of frost or erosion. Humanity slowly abandoned the nomadic existence that had lasted for hundreds of generations. Permanent shelters rose first of bamboo and clay, later of fired brick near water sources and fields. A stable climate brought not only food, but the need for organization, the management and storage of resources. A dwelling was no longer temporary. It became a social and intellectual central place for exchange, for seed keeping, for tool storage, for gatherings, rituals, and teaching. In this environment, humans began to observe the seasons, to track subtle climatic changes, and to predict the time for sowing and harvest. Environmental stability became the foundation for long-term planning, from agriculture to tool specialization. The urgent pressures of the steppe and forest gave way to the demands of managing time, resources, and labor, the groundwork for agriculture and civilization. Observation, recording, and transmission of knowledge became essential, forming the earliest structures of education and collective memory. The stable, Holocene climate made surplus production possible. Seeds, harvests, and domesticated animals became precious assets to be stored and protected. This need was not merely personal, it was communal. People developed strategies to defend crops from predators, insects, floods, and rival groups. Fertile land, water, and storage pits became the centers of settlement life, giving rise to management, distribution, and long-term planning, alongside emerging cooperation and early social regulations to preserve order. The pressures of surplus and protection drove the creation of more efficient tools, the organization of systematic labor, and the formation of complex social hierarchies, the foundations of all civilizations to come. The shift from nomadism to settlement required mastery over biological rhythms, the growth of plants and the breeding of animals. Each season carried its schedule, sowing in the rains, harvesting before drought, storing food carefully against decay, and maintaining livestock health for a stable source of protein. This transformation imposed a new demand. On process, activities could no longer remain short-term reactions to nature, but had to be planned, sequential, and coordinated within the community. Farmers learned to remember the seasons, to store seeds, to divide labor, and to adjust strategies in response to changing weather. The combination of observation, memory, and social organization formed the foundation of systemic thinking, the ability to predict and to control the surrounding environment. These temporal and procedural needs fostered the emergence of organized cognition, the capacity for long-term planning, prediction, and collective labor, paving the way for specialized tools, land management, and the rise of the first civilizations. Once humanity began to settle permanently, the environment was no longer a passive backdrop. It became an object of control, managing water, reshaping soil, building irrigation systems, digging canals, and tilling land required tools that not only served immediate needs, but also permanently altered the landscape, while cultivating skills of organization, supervision, and intergenerational knowledge transfer. The stability of the Holocene combined with foresight and optimized tools, marked the beginning of an era in which humanity ceased to be a purely biological reaction to nature, becoming instead an active agent, one that shaped and redefined reality itself. Tools now became instruments of intervention into natural cycles, sowing in the right season, regulating water flow, storing food for the community. The concept of time became embedded in physical actions, in crops, in the flow of rivers, in the moisture of soil, and humans began to organize life around these rhythms. From the carved edges of terraces, the irrigation channels drawn from rivers, to the granaries built to preserve the seeds of continuity, from this necessity, long-term thinking, foresight, and systemic organization emerged. Humanity no longer reacted passively to nature. It began to plan, to design specialized tools, and to build enduring environments, transforming each field, each stream, each implement into a link in the chain of long-term survival. In the Neolithic, tools became direct extensions of human intent in shaping the landscape. Sickles, ground axes, and grinding stones were no longer isolated objects. They were means of transforming the natural environment into a controllable resource, reflecting both strategic thought and the capacity to anticipate. The sickle enabled efficient harvesting, optimizing the rhythm of the season, allowing food surplus accumulation, and reducing losses from decay or predation. The refinement of its shape and sharpness was the result of repeated trials, observation, and learning across many harvests, creating a tool both durable and efficient. The polished stone axe opened the way to expanding farmland, cutting trees, clearing forests, and constructing shelters. It marked the first lasting human alteration of the physical environment, where each strike and each processed trunk represented an investment of energy, skill, and calculation. The grinding stone represented the earliest stage of food processing, turning raw grain into flour for preservation, distribution, and consumption according to community need, allowing long-term storage and the beginnings of trade and redistribution. The cognition behind these tools was not merely about grasping or handling. It was systemic and predictive thinking. Humans had to envision the entire chain. Sowing gives tending, gives harvesting, gives processing, gives storing. Each action led into the next, requiring organization, timing, and collective coordination. These sequences transformed tools into nodes within a network of life where each implement was not merely an object, but a component of a greater plan. This became the essential bridge toward metal tools. As humanity began smelting copper and iron to create more powerful instruments for surplus production and complex social management, thought shifted from reactive behavior to strategic foresight. Each tool no longer served a single, momentary purpose, but was designed for endurance, to be used repeatedly through cycles of growth and harvest, reflecting knowledge of material, force, and optimal duration. Durability, sickles, axes, and grinding stones were polished and reinforced, extending their lifespan and maximizing the extraction of natural resources. The acts of polishing, shaping, and assembling reflected deliberate intention and premeditated understanding of strength, wear, and utility, specialization. Each tool served a distinct function: the sickle for harvesting, the axe for clearing, the grinder for processing, yet all converged on one goal: mastering the growth cycle of cereal and wet rice, ensuring stability and food surplus, the foundation of long-term security and sustained community life. This marked the birth of strategic thinking in resource management and social organization, laying the groundwork for the coming age of metallurgy and complex civilization. The sharpening of a sickle or the grinding of a stone was no longer a spontaneous act. Each stroke represented a significant investment of time and energy, evidence of the settler's intent to create lasting instruments of survival. Humans no longer lived from meal to meal, from hunt to hunt. Instead, they began to think in cycles and outcomes. A durable sickle ensured multiple harvests. A strong axe expanded arable land. An efficient grinder secured grain reserves through the dry season. Each tool now became an extension of the mind, a connection between hand, eye, and intellect, reflecting the birth of organized cognition, foresight, and the capacity to manage the natural cycles upon which future millennia would depend. This investment also mirrored a new awareness of time itself. Humans understood that the labor of today determined the survival of the months ahead. It was the transition from reactive action to strategic purpose, opening the path to metalworking and the rise of complex social systems. Awareness of seasons, rivers, and soil fertility began to define the human sense of space and survival, shaping calculations of energy, return, and sustainability, and from this arose the capacity for long-term planning and community organization. The arrival of copper and iron marked a strategic leap in human cognition. These metals were not merely new materials. They were extensions of power, tools that magnified control over the environment, plowing wet rice fields, clearing grasslands, and forging weapons to defend stored food and territory. Metal carried endurance beyond stone, enabling humanity to manifest large-scale visions, irrigation systems, canals, defensive structures. Unlike polished stone, metal required complex manufacture, mining or smelting, casting, forging, and sharpening. Each stage revealed foresight and technical precision, for a metal tool had to last through many harvests and many conflicts. Every phase demanded calculation, melting temperature, or purity, timing of hammering, the force upon bronze or iron, all designed to ensure optimal performance and endurance. Metal tools opened the path to specialization. Some individuals became blacksmiths, others focused on farming, hunting, or construction. Through this division of labor, society began to differentiate roles, increasing productivity and laying the foundation for complex civilizations. The process of metalworking became a chain of knowledge, transmitted across generations, stimulating the development of training systems, written records, and the exchange of technical expertise. The making of copper and iron tools was not merely a physical act, but an expression of early industrial process thinking. Humans had to anticipate steps, control temperature, manage smelting time, evaluate ore quality, and refine forging technique, a tightly connected sequence in which every mistake altered the final result. This marked a cognitive leap from direct manipulation of matter to the ability to model, predict, and optimize long-term processes. Unlike polished stone, metal tools were durable, recyclable, and adaptable to multiple purposes, from agriculture to warfare, from craftsmanship to ritual. The complexity of their manufacture reflected long-term planning and material awareness, marking a crucial advance in human cognition from tools made for immediate need to instruments of environmental and social control. Each bronze or iron blade was the crystallization of observation, calculation, and accumulated experience, transforming matter into a vehicle of thought. a symbol of knowledge and authority, metal tools signaled a profound turning point in social structure and collective survival. They no longer served individuals or small groups alone, but became pillars sustaining and expanding civilization. An iron plow increased rice yields, ensuring surplus and food security. A spear or iron sword defended villages from invasion. The mastery of metallurgy brought with it the differentiation of labor. Blacksmiths, warriors, farmers, leaders, each defined by specialized tools, forming the first layers of social hierarchy. Tools became instruments of control over resources, mechanisms of order and power. The structural foundation of the great civilizations of the Ganges, Mesopotamia, Egypt, and ancient China. Prediction and planning. Humans no longer reacted instantly to nature, but learned to foresee seasons, regulate river levels, and manage soil productivity. Each harvest became the result of premeditated actions, combining natural observation with knowledge accumulated through generations, establishing resilience against environmental uncertainty. Process thinking, tool making, and tool use ceased to be isolated acts. From stone sickles to iron plows, every stage followed a standardized and optimized sequence. This led to the concept of organized labor, role differentiation, and long-term resource management, paving the way for stable agrarian civilizations, where each action fit within a larger plan designed to sustain society. Abstract thinking, tools began to stimulate abstraction, representing not only function, but also ownership, power, and collective organization. A dam, an irrigation system, or a granary was not merely a structure. It was a network of ideas binding humans to one another and to nature through intentional design. These became mental maps of order, responsibility, and community. The evolution of metal tools transformed craftsmanship from an individual skill into an expression of collective cognition and strategy. Each tool existed not only in the hands of the smith, but within the social structure, the rhythm of seasons, and the system of resource management, marking a decisive shift in the history of human awareness and organization. Humans came to realize that managing land, crops, and grain reserves required accurate measurement, marking field boundaries, calculating planting areas, and monitoring stored quantities were no longer random acts, but deliberate. Quantitative reasoning, the direct precursor of early mathematics, written notation, and agricultural calendars. Awareness of units, proportions, and volumes began to emerge, from boundary stones and grain pits to etched ground lines. Each mark became part of a growing network of management and control. Measuring tools no longer served individuals, but became integrated into systems of governance. Each measure corresponded to cycles of harvest, water flow, storage, and distribution, forming the foundation of social organization. Measurement standards allowed communities to act in unison, allocate resources efficiently, and maintain stability across generations. The concepts of standard, ratio, and unit began to define humanity's perception of order and structure, setting the groundwork for systems of law, taxation, and population control. When a boundary stone, a grain pit, or a mark on the ground became a scale or a symbol, humanity began to separate action from idea, the first step toward writing calendars and intellectual tools. From this arose the capacity to record, compare, predict, and plan. Physical measurements became the basis for the abstract concept of time, allowing communities to align behavior with cycles of growth, harvest, and even subtle climatic shifts. The emergence of measurement instruments, from primitive land rods to standardized containers, was more than a technological development. It was the birth of abstract cognition, a leap from solving immediate survival needs to managing information and process. These measuring tools allowed humans to quantify land, calculate yields, forecast production, and manage property, taxation, and irrigation in systematic ways. They standardized communal activity, linking field, granary, and canal into a single network of logic, where every act was grounded in measurement, comparison, and prediction. They were instruments of intellect, extending human cognition beyond the present moment. Labor was no longer purely physical. Humanity began to operate with concepts, quantities, and standards, building the foundations of mathematics, writing, and organized governance. This abstract thinking, born from the most tangible objects, became the evolutionary bridge to modern technology, from data mapping and scheduling to information management and artificial intelligence, where tools are no longer material but logical, algorithmic, and predictive. Those first measures, viewed through the lens of cognitive evolution, were the seeds of artificial intelligence, humanity's earliest attempt to model and control the world not by strength, but by thought. Physical symbols became the first codes, each measurement a command, each boundary a datum. Humanity began to imagine systems, long-term processes, and large-scale coordination, transforming survival behavior into managerial intelligence across millennia. Rice fields, irrigation channels, and settled villages became physical maps of the human mind. Tools were no longer limited to axes, plows, or hoes. They became social structures, production systems, and information networks. With the rise of metal, the capacity to craft and manipulate matter expanded. Iron plows, grinding machines, bows, and battle axes turned rural landscapes into interconnected systems, laying the groundwork for cities, states, and stratified societies. These material landscapes became cognitive ones, where every structure, tool, and canal bore the imprint of human prediction, organization, and calculation. When agriculture became abundant, the need for exchange, for managing information and knowledge, grew accordingly. Humans invented writing to record harvests, taxes, calendars, and the first scientific measurements. Tools no longer merely extended physical strength. They expanded cognitive capacity, enabling prediction, planning, and large-scale cooperation. Each symbol, each inscription became a vessel of knowledge, forming a network of logic and information where collective power no longer depended on muscle, but on intellect and coordination. As Homo sapiens emerged from the last ice age, stone and bone were no longer the only instruments. Humanity learned to carve on clay, write on paper, print on metal, and ultimately command light and electromagnetic waves. Tools evolved from tangible matter into abstract ideas, opening an era in which intelligence not only shaped the environment but also shaped information, history, and the collective itself. Each advancement in management, measurement, and record-keeping was an advancement in cognition, laying the foundations for creativity, foresight, and cooperation on a global scale. Tools were no longer extensions of the body or of physical power. They became extensions of memory, imagination, and interaction between individual and collective. A manuscript could preserve information across centuries. A digital map could reveal worlds never touched by hand. An email or instant message could synchronize millions of lives within a single pulse of time. Tools became the bridge between individual cognition and social networks, between biological memory and collective memory, from the Acheulean hand axe, the Mousterian blade, and the bow of early Homo sapiens, to the keyboard, the touchscreen, and the data cloud. Tools have preserved their central role, expanding perception and capacity for action. They extended the human hand, but also the human mind, allowing each individual to transcend biological limits. Every tool, from stone to silicon, from axe to algorithm, is a link between idea and world, between observation and intervention, between imagination and execution, from the control of matter to the control of information. Modern tools, such as computers, software, and artificial intelligence, represent the pinnacle of abstraction, where physics yields to logic and data. What has changed is the nature of what is mastered, from tangible substance to invisible information. Modern humans no longer interact solely with nature, but reconstruct and navigate their own reality through data, symbols, and global networks. Each movement of the hand across a keyboard or screen becomes a decision, an intervention in an informational web, extending individual influence upon the environment and society in ways unknown to history. The brain still retains its hippocampus, still holds internal maps, yet those maps are now digitized, accelerated, multiplied. Ancestors such as Homo erectus or Neanderthal survived through direct physical engagement with their surroundings, gripping stone, wielding axe, reading traces. Their success was bound to sensation and biological memory. The capacity for prediction, once a survival tool on the savannah, has become a strategic instrument in economics, politics, and technology. In this transformation, biological mechanisms that once served life directly have become the substrate of abstract thought, where simulation, modeling, and computation replace immediate sensory contact. Today, modern humans perceive the world through tables, algorithms, and data models, predicting outcomes without ever touching raw material. Tools have become extensions of perception, enabling influence through layers of logic and abstraction, transforming data into action, models into decisions, information into power. Digital systems link humans to their environment, blurring the boundary between individual, community, and material world, all governed through abstract instruments. From clay to cloud, the lineage of human evolution continues. Tools change in form, but not in purpose, to enhance survival, awareness, and connection. The modern hand no longer holds stone or spear, but touches data, symbols, and knowledge, reflecting a long evolutionary process in which human intelligence mirrors the movement of the hand. The coordination between mind, symbol, and physical action now multiplies exponentially, where each digital gesture connects to a global network, extending the creative continuum that began with early Homo sapiens. Modern humans do not merely forge physical tools. They create tools of thought. Software, algorithms, artificial intelligence, all are extreme expressions of the abstracting capacity that Homo sapiens first revealed with cave paintings. A computer program has no limbs, yet it processes information, optimizes actions, and predicts outcomes according to encoded logic. AI does not grip stone or slice flesh, but as an extended brain, it projects human cognition onto scales that biological mind alone could never reach. Modern tools operate through language, symbols, and code, pure abstractions, devoid of material substance. They are direct descendants of the earliest symbolic traces on the walls of Lascaux, where ancient Homo sapiens created images to remember, communicate, and imagine. Today that lineage has multiplied exponentially, from image GIFs to writing GIFs to code GIFs to AI, each step expanding humanity's control of the world through symbols, where individuals and collectives interact not through muscle, but through logic, data, and complex imagination, stretching across tens of thousands of years of evolution. The hand no longer wields stone or tool of labor, but shapes virtual environments, manipulates data, constructs models, and sets predictive pathways in motion. Modern tools are the fullest reflection of abstract intelligence, and the clearest evidence that cognitive evolution continues, no longer as reaction or short-term adaptation, but as control and orientation of reality through logic, symbol, and information. Each operation, each line of code, each data model is a direct continuation of the process begun tens of thousands of years ago. The transition from material to conceptual tool, from physical strength to intellectual force, from manual action to cognitive manipulation, looking back across time, from the first cobbles of Homo habilis, the Acheulean hand axes of Homo erectus, the Mousterian blades of Neanderthal, to the bows and bone tools of early Homo sapiens. Every tool mirrors intellect and necessity. Each marks an advance in observation, prediction, and manipulation. The cobble cut and shaped. The hand axe opened new terrain. The Mousterian blade refined food preparation. The bow extended the reach of the hunt. And finally, modern tools extend the reach of mind beyond the body itself. Each step amplifies the capacity for survival, yet each also moves toward abstraction, where cognition becomes detached from direct physical sensation. Yet within this evolution lies a silent trade-off. As tools for controlling information became central, the intuitive capacities, once vital for survival, spatial awareness, bodily coordination, observation of nature, began to fade. The abilities that had carried ancestors through winters, guided hunts, and migrations across frozen valleys were replaced by the capacity to interact with data and algorithms. Biological reflexes that once ensured survival, the eyes tracking movement, the hands grasping, the body reacting to its surroundings, have been transposed into logical reflexes, symbolic manipulations, and programming operations. Tools do not merely extend humanity. At times, they reshape it, directing patterns of thought, behavior, and priority, altering how the brain allocates attention, processes information, and expends its cognitive energy. Today, in the hands of humans are computers, phones, AI, and software instruments that enable connection, computation, and prediction beyond anything the ancestors could have imagined. Yet within these absolute conveniences lies a question: is evolution still evolution? When the mental maps once used to navigate open plains have been replaced by GPS, when the instinct to track, to read traces, to sense danger directly has dimmed, when the body no longer adapts ceaselessly to nature, but the mind instead manipulates abstract data, what remains of the skills once essential to survival? Are the ancient capacities, encoded through genes and learning, still vital, or are they giving way to the skills of operating within abstract networks of information and symbols? Perhaps evolution has never truly been about physical strength or survival skills alone. It has always been a balance between the control of matter and the control of information, between comfort and self-maintenance, where humanity stands. both as the heir of the dexterous hand and the architect of abstract environments. Each tool, from the iron plow to artificial intelligence, carries within it a shift in behavior, social organization, and cognition. Humans learned to predict, to optimize, to manipulate their surroundings across layers of abstraction, yet in doing so, have traded away fragments of instinct and embodied intuition, and the question endures, echoing across millions of years: do tools evolve humans, or do humans evolve through tools? Evolution is no longer the blind selection of the environment, but a process of coevolution between human and instrument. What was once instinct has become abstraction. What was once a means of survival has become a means of imagining and predicting the future. Between these two ages, from caves, grasslands, and frozen plains to keyboards, data, and global networks, the final question still resounds: are we guiding the tool, or is the tool guiding us? Every operation, every program, every prediction humankind creates is a test of balance between power and freedom, control and dependence, reflecting the ongoing evolution of cognition, where human and tool continuously co-create one another's destiny.